welcome back to the show here. We did a little technical shuffling of the cards, and hopefully they can hear us in the room, the hundreds of people that have made it here tonight as part of the Modern Knowledge Tour 2014. I know we've got Linda Moulton Howe and Richard Dolan joining us.
Hello.
And maybe I heard, guys, that maybe this is the first time you guys have been on an
Together.
interview together.
Have we?
I don't think we ever have been on an interview together.
I don't know.
Because you guys know each other, really.
Oh, yeah.
Very
we've
well
known
for
each other
many
for
years.
a long time.
But no, I don't think we've done a live thing together. All right.
Isn't that amazing?
This is a first.
Linda is one of my favorite people in the entire world.
And it's so funny because
And
in
I'm so glad
Canada,
it is.
you are both from the States, and in Canada, we have to go to the States for these kinds of things to happen. And you came to Canada to be together. This is the first time
Yeah.
you guys are. That's awesome.
Well, I think when we're at conferences, which is normally where our lives would cross, he does his speech, I do mine. If there are workshops, everything is always going on like a constant
It's always
moving
crazy.
Rubik thing.
Yeah.
And so we have to fight to get time to sit down and actually talk at conferences. They're hectic.
Well, I guess this is a really good sign, though, because that means what you guys are doing, which is so out there by some people's standards, but it's really, really growing. If you are so busy with what you're doing, this must be, and you guys have been doing this for so long, this must be just so gratifying for you to see how much it's growing.
I don't think it's out there because I've always been a mainstream journalist. I'm a producer, writer, director, editor, and investigative reporter. And my beat has always been science, medicine, and the environment. That's what I graduated from Stanford University. I produced films for them in the Stanford Medical Center. My master's thesis was on the Stanford Linear Accelerator's first efforts to get computers to analyze the atomic bombardment particles. And so it was this background of always being in the hard-nosed science that when I was director of special projects at the CBS station in Denver, and I started work there in 1978, everything I was doing was science, medicine, and the environment. And one of the stories in Colorado and here in Canada, in almost every province back then, were the bloodless, trackless animal mutilations. And I had one of the most interesting conversations with your investigator for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Calgary. And he had seen the documentary I did, A Strange Harvest, and I had never talked to him. He called me at the station, and he had gotten a copy of the program, which is about mutilated animals and some law enforcement saying the perpetrators are creatures from outer space. This is not the reporter saying this. This is law enforcement. And when Lynn Lauber, who was head of the mutilation investigation in Calgary for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, called me, and he said, I've seen your film, and I just want you to know it's everything that we're investigating. And I said, sir, then why are you putting out headlines throughout Canada that's picked up in the United States that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are focusing on a cult, a satanic cult named O, the letter O? A book had been written about this back in the 70s. Literally, this was his answer to me, because we have to get the public and the media off our back. And I said then, you've seen my documentary, and you know that law enforcement is telling me that the perpetrators are creatures from outer space. And he said to me on the phone, this is not on camera, I would agree. That is the background to the animal mutilations. That is the background to why, if you are a producer, writer, director, editor, and your beat is science, environment, and medicine, and you get yourself buried into all the work it takes, 18 hours a day, to try to get to the bottom of animal mutilations, and this is what you're being told by law enforcement. And then you realize that from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada to sheriff's offices, police offices, attorney general's offices in the United States, everybody is not telling the truth, because somehow the fix is in. it will not be politically correct for your career if you investigate the animal mutilations that are linked to extraterrestrials. And so I'm here today because 35 years I have simply been trying to build the solid, hard brick evidence that supports what those sheriffs told me back in '79 and what Lynn Lauber in Calgary told me on the phone. The perpetrators of animal mutilations are creatures from outer space, and how can you go through that and not want to know who, what, why? What does the Canadian government, the American government, the Chinese government, all the governments, what do they know? And why is there a policy of denial to the taxpayers around the world on something as fundamental as we're not alone in the universe? And my colleague, Rich Dolan, has gone into the history about what is the foundation for such a policy of denial that would persist from World War II to this day, and you and I know how many layers of lies.
Yeah. Exactly. I love what you said. I want to answer your question, which is, I can't even remember now, but you talked about, is like, why are there more people interested in this now?
It's growing, I would have thought.
How did we get into this?
Well,
and the
we
growing
got into
momentum.
it in a very compatible way. We both came in through what was a mainstream prism. But I will say I've only been involved in this now researching 20 years, maybe 21 years. And I have noticed a definite cultural sea change from my part, and that's why I think we're so busy. It's insane in terms of the amount of activity that both of us are engaged in, because there is a profound hunger for knowledge that people have, and they know that in their everyday life they're being lied to about the whole structure of what their reality is supposed to be. They know this. Even if they don't know it in their heads, they know it in their bones, that there's something very desperately wrong about the construct of their reality. And so they're searching for literally alternative news. And that whole field has grown exponentially in the last 20 years. I mean, more than 20 years ago, there was no internet. There was no true wide outlet for this type of research. The MUFON journal would have maybe 2,000 copies, very limited stuff. But now it's the potentials for millions and millions of people to be involved and to get this information. And guess what? They're into it. And that includes conferences, that includes events like this Modern Knowledge Tour that we're doing, going across Canada in an RV, meeting people across this country and discovering that there is a tremendous desire, I hear them clapping in there, for this kind of information. So there's as Linda was saying, there's this huge disconnect between this massive reality that's obviously here, that's obviously important, that is being, and the fact that it's being denied by all of the official powers that be.
And
but people know there's a problem with it.
One of the things that goes right to the heart of what's happening now is more and more whistleblowers. Yeah. I don't think in the last, well, if I got into this 35 years ago, it's just been since around 2007. There has been an uptick, and it seems to keep growing, and we're talking about substantive people who have worked on the back engineering of extraterrestrial technology and are prepared to say that. And the Corso, Lieutenant Philip J. Corso, a man who NBC embarrassed, and they had no right to. His background was incredible. He worked with General Arthur Trudeau in the Pentagon. Yeah. The story of Lieutenant Philip J. Corso was the truth about the United States government in collaboration, I'm sure, with the World War II, we'll call them allies of Canada, England, New Zealand, and Australia. But in the United States, it was Philip J. Corso's own firsthand testimony that he was being handed in the Pentagon extraterrestrial technology defined as such. and taking it to, let's say, one person, let's pick Corning Glass. Could have been any corporation that they needed to analyze. He has a one-on-one connection through the Pentagon. It is handed over. No one in Corning Glass knows that it's extraterrestrial. And Philip J. Corso in detail defines and describes he was the guy taking this material to these different corporations under the highest levels of government. General Trudeau was appointed by General Eisenhower, who became president, and they knew each other from the war. And President Eisenhower says to Trudeau, I want you to be our first research, science and research director in the Pentagon, because as I understand it, Rich, he was the only Army general ever to this day who had a PhD.
Arthur Trudeau?
General Arthur Trudeau was a PhD in engineering. And Eisenhower bonded with him when they were in World War II, trusted him, and that's why he handpicked. Trudeau knew Corso from the Italian campaign, and men in war, or men and women, they go to the people they trust.
Of course.
That book, that man, deserves to be on everybody's reading list around the world, and yet, when this man, he was dead only 8 months after the book came out, when he was interviewed in an NBC program, we'll call them the so-called host investigator. They used a part in where Lieutenant Colonel Corso said that they knew they were dealing with time. And I think he said something about timelines, which implied time travel.
Right.
And when NBC ran that program,
This was during the 50th anniversary of Roswell.
It was
I believe
the program came later after that, but it was in that same milieu with the book. For those of us in television, you know that you can produce anything, edit anything to make a person look great or not. And the way, when I saw the first broadcast, and it was enraging because it was a hatchet piece to a man who had served in our military in an extremely important capacity by people who in families knew that Corso and Trudeau knew each other very well. And why? Somebody in our government, I think, did not want the back engineering to come out, let alone the possibility of time travelers. So they have fixes in all the media so that, and I don't know if it goes on in Canada, but I know it does in the United States. There are controllers. They won't be called that. They'll be called executive producer of.
I just want to jump in very quickly
Go.
there. So first of all, I think you're exactly right about 2007-ish being the jumping off point for the whistleblower explosion. And there's a very clear reason for that, in my opinion, which is that around that time is when we developed a global infrastructure to accommodate whistleblowers. There was no WikiLeaks 10 years ago because we didn't have a global infrastructure to accommodate an organization grabbing digital data and throwing it out there. But now we have that infrastructure, and behold, here's WikiLeaks. It's like if you build it, they will come. Same for whistleblowers. We didn't have YouTube prior to 2005. There was no YouTube. There was some video, but it wasn't the same. You start getting an infrastructure in place where people have a forum where they can talk. So all of this is a symptom that our whole civilization is going through this dramatic transformation right now. It's all based on revolutions in technology, which means revolutions in communication, which means that people now can have a way to tell their story. And by the way, regarding Corso, I agree with you on Corso completely. And it's nice to remember that when he first wrote his book, he got his forward by U.S. Senator Strom Thurmond, who I think was about 180 at the time he wrote it. Actually, when Thurmond, he wrote this ringing endorsement of Corso's book because he knew him. Corso had a tremendous amount of prestige and respect in his position. He was a Senate liaison. He was an assistant to Thurman for military matters. Thurman loved him. He didn't know what the book was explicitly about, but he respected Corso and said, you know, this man is an American hero. When the book came out and the media frenzy took place on Corso, the press all descended on Strom Thurmond, and he had to say basically, I don't know nothing about no UFOs, and then they pulled us forward. But this was Corso. And then the other thing about Corso is, you know, he kind of wrote his book and he kind of didn't write his book. So it was all on deadline. Bill Burns of UFO Mag really wrote that together. Factual errors galore, made it very easy to pick that book apart by skeptics who said, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong. Although the fundamentals of what Corso said, I've always felt were very logical. And everyone who knew Corso, a lot of people interviewed him, and everyone, I'm not aware of any one person who said he's full of it.
No.
Is it worth getting the book?
Oh, yes, because the day after Roswell.
The day after Roswell,
yeah.
So it's worth. So it's interesting that they can't put a stop to that. They can put a stop to the media and he's no longer here. But
well, they tried making him look like a fool, as Linda said.
Right.
That's exactly right. And there's always and there are controllers in the media, in Canadian too. It's the same.
Of course,
U.S. media has been so tightly controlled for so long.
There's a joke where we have a major station called CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
The public broadcaster.
Well, and we say controlled by Canada. That's
yeah.
pretty much say that's. I've done animal rights for many years, and they would always say, "Oh, nobody showed up at these protests," and I would be there, and there were thousands of people. So it was just a joke amongst our.
Well, the
Should
bottom
be CBB
line,
controlled by the Bilderbergers?
Yes.
Probably be more apropos, but anyway.
the bottom line is that Corso was saying that he was the one who took extraterrestrial technology from an office in the Pentagon, from a General Trudeau, who was a close friend of the President of the United States. Don't forget that. And was hand delivering into corporations to back engineer. And one of the most powerful of the leaks that was in 2007 comes from a man who said that he worked in a Palo Alto laboratory, also trying to back engineer, leaked a document that is commercial application research for extraterrestrial technology. CARET is the acronym. And the whole idea, he said, was that the Department of Defense in the United States was frustrated by the slowness of their government contractors. They're trying to back engineer extraterrestrial technology without anybody in the world knowing that they have it, and they want to get it patented and copyrighted in all of the various legal issues in the United States to keep it out of the hands of other nations. That's their goal. And because the process was so slow, this whistleblower was a scientist, said about 200 scientists of varying types were brought together and told that this was a program the Department of Defense would be in charge, but they wanted them to be in Palo Alto in the 1980s in a mix where what we now call today the computer world that became Apple and everything. They wanted to see if a bunch of scientists with extraterrestrial technology could literally back engineer and accelerate this process. And he said the thing about it, I got to communicate with him privately, this man. He said, when you come to work and they have been telling you that they want you to feel like you're completely the scientist that you are, but they have submachine guns in the room. Right there is the metaphor of the last 60 years of our government certainly trying to go like this on anything related to extraterrestrial, needing scientists, the best scientists that there are. And how do you put those two together when they are antithetical? And there are so many stories of people being given offers of tremendous amounts of money to go underground. And that what has been taking place underground probably in Canada as well as the United States, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, that if we could lift up the surface of this planet, what would be revealed would probably shock all of us.
Absolutely.
No, I have a question. I'm going to, okay, so there's a whole other theory about UFOs, right? So what you guys are saying is that they're extraterrestrials, they come from off planet. There's a whole other theory that flying saucers were developed in Germany during the Second World War, and that the stories of them being from extraterrestrial origins really only came out after the Second World War, but without any actual proof that these craft come from off planet.
I can give you one opening context,
something I want to say on that.
because where you need to frame this is actually before World War II. There was a book. I've seen it, I've read it, and I'm trying to remember whether it was called The New Science or The New World Coming. But it was in the teens, was written around 1917, and it was about a ongoing effort by certain groups in Germany who were talking about how that there were forces among them in which there was going to be a change in the world, and that tall, blonde, blue-eyed, white-skinned super beings would become the dominant population of the planet. This is what the book is about. And that when Hitler began rising to power, I have talked with a man who read the document I'm going to describe to you. He worked in Army cryptoanalysis in a southeastern Army base, but his check came from the CIA in Langley. And he was in Langley, and there's a basement archive. It's separate from Suitland, Maryland, which lots of intel stuff. This is a Langley archive that is underground. It's quite large. And they were going down there because his boss was looking for something very specific about discs, because they were both assigned to work in a Project Blue Book, nothing like the phony Blue Book that was paraded for the media and it was silly. No, this was the real Project Blue Book, and it was being handled through Fort Belvoir in Virginia. And it was going to the CIA. The CIA had units that were working, going all around the world where there were reports of discs and beings. This is where this guy worked. And he said they were looking for specific information on a specific shape, the shape of craft, are indicators to the government of certain types. They're down there, they get a folder, and inside is a document that was written in 1927. And it was from an intel group in England to, and Rich and I, you've tried to tell me it was, I don't even know if it was the OSS in 1927.
No.
It's whatever the precursor was that we were using of any kind. And it was, the date is, I know, is inflexible. I know it was 1927.
Army Signal Intelligence, that might have been it.
There was communication between
Army Intelligence
England and the United States, and England is asking the United States in the document, so it's an England document to the U.S. in the CIA. Do you know anything about the silver discs that are rising in the skies above Pienemundi?
And that was what year?
1927. The war way later. And as I understand it, from this man who worked for the CIA, Army cover, extraterrestrials, for reasons that I'm not sure, were literally physically working in Germany underground. And those were extraterrestrial craft. And some deal was supposed to be struck that then we hear about when the Nazis and Hitler pick it up later, and there are the Vril and the one that's so hard.
The Hannibal.
The Hannibal.
Yeah.
Were those made by German humans, or were those made by extraterrestrials and passed off to the world as German?
Well, they did have mediums that were supposedly in contact with people from Aldebaran or something like that.
The idea about UFOs not being extraterrestrial and being the result of German technology, Nazi technology, I'm with Linda on this. All you really need to do is go back through some of the historical sightings that we have that are very good sightings. And there's just no way to explain these as German/Nazi tech.
Is this before the Second World War then?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely, well before. I mean, if there are discs out of Peenemünde in 1927, that's not German manufactured, not even a chance. German military was totally demilitarized in 1927. They were trying ever so hard to sneakily do some training with Russia, Soviet Union actually, and even that was just, that didn't really get going until after Hitler got into power. I did archive work in the Canadian archives a number of years ago, looking at reports that Canadian citizens would send into the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, right? So back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, if you, Canadian citizen, had a UFO sighting, you would send it into the police. They would send it off to Ottawa, where scientists in white coats with bald heads would promptly run away from them and just file them and never look at them again. But the reports are there. You can read them. So I encountered one report from an elderly man writing in 1981 about when he was 25 years old in 1936. So this is a time when the Nazis were in power, but hear this. He was employed as a young man doing aerial mapping operations for the Canadian government in the way, way, way north. Because now there's aircraft, and the government wanted accurate topography, geography, maps of that distant region, which they could now do with aerial photography. So he was in the Northwest Territories, way up in what's called the Barren Lands. There's no trees that grow up there. There's nothing there, even to this day, at a place called Aylmer Lake. I had to look this up on Google Maps. There's middle of nowhere. And he writes, this is a meticulous man. He was doing a before-flight check on his craft, one of those cool aircraft that can land on the water. And he said, and I happened, for whatever reason, to glance skyward. And this is either spring or summer 1936. And there was the vehicle in question, he said, completely stationary. How long it had been there, for whatever reason, he did not know. It was, he didn't know how large it was because there was no clouds whatsoever, but it was right there, and he thought it was large. Slightly oblong in shape, no markings on it whatsoever, no sound. In an instant, it turned from a north-south configuration to east-west, and then he said it accelerated instantly. Instant acceleration. He said from the moment of takeoff until it was at the horizon was a matter of moments. And he attached his military service record to prove his identity, his veracity. That was not available to me. It was not in the archives. But very, very interesting, compelling story. If that's not good enough.
And just one really important point. We humans, biologically and technologically, we cannot go from static inertia to the horizon.
Well, unless you have a completely radical system of propulsion,
and good seat belts. Good seat belts.
But we're in 1936. I think sometimes
chance,
people lose the concept that something
that
goes, that is not
anything. But any physical
exactly,
creature made out of atoms would have the same issue, right?
Well, okay.
Unless you have an artificial gravitational field that you've constructed around you, and then it's not an issue.
In terms of what we're learning today, is that the ET technology is literally interacting with the fundamental laws of vacuum and physics. And it's a complicated concept. But if you can change just one or two pieces of formula, you can match every single thing that is reported about UFOs, including them being larger on the inside than they look on the outside, being able to go from to infinity, and it all turns on a tiny change, the tiniest change in a physical reality that is our physics, and we can't do this. We cannot do this tampering. But if we could, everything that we see falls out of this. And the craft on the inside is like a completely different dimension than the Earth dimension that it's in. It's very complex physics, but we're talking about physics that's becoming understandable.
Okay, so the aliens, whoever they are, there's different people talk about different. There's good aliens, bad aliens, grays, whatever. Some say they're bad. Some say they're disarming our nuclear missiles.
Well, they're interested in our nuclear technology for sure.
I don't think they want us to have a nuclear war.
No,
that kills the life they need.
From 1945 to the end of the century, there were over 2,000 nuclear explosions on planet Earth. Over 2,000. There's a chilling YouTube video you can look for this. Just has in kind of real time, condensed down to 10 minutes, every nuclear explosion on planet Earth with a map of where it took. It's amazing. And when we talk about the environmental damage that we're dealing with, whether it's climate change or what have you, I don't hear anyone talking about how we've blown our stratosphere into smithereens with over 2,000 nuclear detonations. What we do know, in fact, this is in my new book, UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. I interviewed a retired U.S. Navy man who, in the early 1960s, took place in something called Operation Dominic. So from April to October of 1962, right after the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the U.S. government, in its infinite wisdom, decided it was a good idea to have 36 nuclear explosions in the upper stratosphere off the coast of Hawaii. Great idea. So huge amount of damage, obviously, to the environment. I spoke to two gentlemen who were involved in the Navy at that time. Both of them said explicitly, there were bogeys every single time that they looked that when there was going to be detonation.
Wow.
One of them was explicitly involved in Dominic, and he said this happened all the time, and every time just before detonation took place, the bogeys would disappear. And we knew this always, except on one occasion, actually, when one seemed to come down. And it was a failed retrieval operation in late October '62. It's a fascinating story, and I've written about it. But the point is, they're interested in our nuclear technology. They've always been interested in our nukes. You go right back to the beginning, 1940s. All of the Freedom of Information Act documents that the U.S. has, which is only the tiniest sliver of the actual reality of the situation. It's almost as if you have like this white wall, and you throw black paint over it, and there's a couple of white spots, and that's what we have to look at.
That's right.
So those are our documents. In those documents, it's evident that our America's nuclear installations from the 40s onward, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Hanford in the state of Washington, and others, and then the missile sites, all of them were visited continuously by objects that didn't look normal, that is disc shape or round, didn't act normal, like they could loiter indefinitely and then just hover and then take off, shoot straight up, and that this got very serious attention, obviously, from the American authorities.
The head of White Sands Missile Range at the time of Project Paperclip referred to all those discs that were showing up when they would try their rocket tests as, this is a quote, peculiar phenomenon, and it made local newspapers. This is the head of White Sands operation that is taking German missiles, and they're having all of these white discs, and that's what he called them, peculiar phenomenon.
Your question, though, was, are they good, are they bad, are they indifferent? They're interested in our nukes. I'm sure they must be concerned about the fact that human beings have control over these nukes, because this is very dangerous, and it's probably not good for them.
Is there any?
Probably.
There's got to be some level of government working with some of these extraterrestrials. Do you guys? I'm sure in some of your research you must know not just about the craft and the mutilation, but how about the individuals conducting these experiments and running these craft? And there must be some sort of communication with them when we're learning this back engineering. And
my workshop tomorrow at the Modern Knowledge Tour, that's exactly what I'm going to be dealing about for 2 hours.
So actually talking about the actual types of extraterrestrial
and government relationship. I think there definitely was an agreement. I think the United States, in or close to the end of World War II, made an agreement.
Is it fair to say, guys, and either one asked the question, are there extraterrestrials walking amongst us? If we walk down the street, is that a far-fetched thing?
I think we would both say yes.
Yes, and
I would say
hybrids.
Yes. Yeah.
The hybrid is probably the most under-discussed subject and probably the most important to every decision the United States has been making since World War II.
And so they look human. When you say hybrid, that we would not know. I could go to a store, to a 7-Eleven, buy something, and the cashier could be one.
Depends on which genetic generation.
Some of them, yes, though, you would not, I don't think you'd be able to tell.
Do they even know they're hybrids?
Yes.
So
okay.
Yes.
What are they doing working at 7-Eleven?
But we really do agree.
Yes.
So that's funny.
We need.
That's funny. We've collected done our own research, and so yeah.
It is really, really a fundamental issue, and you can step back from this and say, okay, if there are extraterrestrial biological entities, and they have, some people have told me, one man who had retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency told me that they knew in his division that 3 competing geopolitical territorial conflicts among extraterrestrials had been affecting this planet for at least 270 million years. Then we, according to a lot of documents, we were made by one or more. That means that technically Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon, Homo sapiens sapien, and however far back you want to go, we are somebody's genetic construct. Why would anything from outer space be doing this? And this gets into an extremely complicated area that I think Corso was trying to address in that NBC studio.
Well, isn't that where the battlefield, were a prize?
Well, but where I'm headed, and you can pick it up, is that everything interacting with this planet may not be strictly extraterrestrial from the solar system next door. That a lot of the phenomena may truly be from a far distant future. And this is the hardest part of all of this phenomena to grasp. Past, present, and future are simultaneous. And that us, 50,000 years in the future, could be at extinction.
So we're doing this to ourselves, Linda? Is that what you're kind of sort of...
This is what RAF Bentwaters is all about. But hang in here for just one more idea, and I'll throw it to Rich. If we at this table, knowing our current human form, right here as we're talking to each other, no matter who made us, and we could see through a time dilation machine that all of the 7 billion and whatever happens next, that there is a bloodline, there is an arc, and that it can go for 50,000 years, and in the process, the technology becomes so advanced it can bend space-time. As soon as in quantum physics, it's Einstein, when you bend space and you put a point of space together with another point, which then now you're affecting gravity, always time is also manipulated. And that what has been emerging out of cases like RAF Bentwaters and others is that what gets to the skies and to the surface of Earth may actually be time travelers who would be like doctors, would be like paramedics. They have a serious problem where physics is advanced, but the bodies have deteriorated to such a point because why? Because they cloned. They cloned and used hybrids and sex seized. And it's the same problem that we are looking at now in the issue of biodiversity on the earth and genetically modified crops.
I was going to say, it sounds like human Monsanto.
Every scientist will tell you.
It would take a lot less than 50,000 years, though, Linda, for that whole mess to happen.
But we are taking all of our biodiversity down to a few strains. If you do that same thing over 50,000 years in humanoid containers, and you leave sexual genes to cloning and to hybridization, the the story so far is that they are dying. They've reached extinction. DNA will no longer replicate. So what do? They're advanced enough to come back in time because they can fold space. And you come back to the last century where genetic material on Earth was healthy enough to harvest. And it's Peniston and Bentwaters who used the word that came into his mind, allegedly from a download from this craft in the forest. They are using us as Band-Aids, meaning genetically they are harvesting, relating to something 50,000 years in the future to survive. And that's why when you ask that question, is it good or bad? I wrestle with this all the time. But in my first book, An Alien Harvest, it came out in 1989. I remember feeling that even though I was in the repulsive subject of animal mutilations, that there was something that I intuitively felt, that it was a survival issue. And the survival can be a two-way or three-way street. And so where we sit today in 2014, where humans are about, it feels like every day, getting closer and closer to war of humans, that something related to us, something intimately related to the evolution of this planet, is involved with trying to survive. And the irony in all of this is it's our survival as well. That they're braided. That's what is repeated over and over and over again in the human abduction syndrome. That whatever is happening, no matter who made us, we are intimately involved in a timeline with something coming from the future that needs genetic material from this planet for it to survive. And if it survives, we survive. That's how complex all of this is.
Well, speaking of timelines, it looks like we're just about out of time here. So if people want to...
let's jump on another timeline and extend it.
So we're just going to wrap it up here so we can get on with Michael Tellinger. But Linda, that's really something to think about. And people can come and see you're doing a presentation tomorrow. Right?
Lecture. I think each one of us lecture.
We're
and
doing a
workshop.
lecture.
We're gonna
Yeah,
of course.
but we are
as well.
lecture and workshop.
Is this together? You guys are doing it?
No, we're each doing our own.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and you've got books and you've got a website, Linda.
Yes, my books are too big to lug around and ship around. And I made them big so that the documents and the photographs could be really, really clear.
But don't be overwhelmed by that.
No, I think you would find them very valuable. But so I only have one place, and the prices never change. It isn't like eBay or others. And it's earthfiles.com. My news website, earthfiles.com, has been there since 1999 and evolving and huge now. And so there is a shop there where all my work always is. And earthfiles@earthfiles.com is my email. Okay. And I'd look forward to hearing from anybody about anything.
Okay, that's awesome. And Richard, you want to just tell us briefly about your subject matter tomorrow?
Be happy to. Yes, I've been honing and working this lecture since I've been on this tour. It's a 90-minute extravaganza into a rethinking of the entire UFO subject, which is really the theme of my latest book, UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. That is dealing with the UFO phenomenon in terms of its intrinsic mystery, why I believe it stands really at the very edge of our ability to understand our worldview as it is, and then beyond that. The politics, the deep politics, not the grade school level version of politics that we get in our media, but what's actually going on in terms of the concealment of information, why that is so, why the science of that affects the UFO phenomenon is so very important. I've got a lot to say on that. And then looking into the future as to how I really think all of this is going to come to an end in another decade or so.
When you say it's going to come to an end, what does
this
that mean?
This is we're not in a holding pattern. So we're in a situation where our society is almost leapfrogging over itself, and reinventing itself every decade. And I believe something is going to transform this situation so that something will come out. I don't know.
Positive or
what will that do for real estate values?
It'll be a big. Listen, this whole everything that we have here is ephemeral, and something major is going to change it.
So it sounds to me like we're speaking of like a shift in consciousness. Are we talking something
like that? We're going to have a shift in
that?
infrastructure. We're going to have a lot of crazy people pulling their hair out of their heads, running around in circles. Shift in consciousness. People have been talking about that was supposed to happen on December 21, 2012, if you recall. Not saying
that was
it won't
another
happen.
timeline, Richard. Sorry.
Yes, there we go. No, I don't. I think what we're going to have to do is called growing up. So we're going to have to deal with a new situation, and it's like all aspects of growing up. It will be painful, but it will be necessary, and I think we'll come out of it better than before. My workshop, I've done the last few of these. It's worked out very well. I actually sit down and have discussion with people, and we tend to share experiences and try to figure out what is going on. A number of people have been experiencers who've talked about their situation, and I basically leading an intimate discussion among people who are interested in this.
Okay, great. And what's your website for people who want to follow up?
RichardDolanPress.com.
Guys, thank you so much for all the work you do, for being pioneers in what you do, and for moving us forward, because I think your work is so important, and just and you add so much credibility, so that when I go home and I talk about UFOs and ETs, my family doesn't look at me and say, okay, you know what, here we go again.
Thank you. I feel like the luckiest person I know. I get to research something that I'm truly obsessively fascinated by, and I get to do it all the time. It can be maddening. I'm sure you agree, Linda, but it's also incredibly rewarding, because we're both explorers. We're both doing what we can do to figure out, I think, what is one of a series of the greatest mysteries that we can be encountering. And it's in the process of going through this, by the way, in which you reinvent your worldview countless times, because that's what happens, that's true growth right there.
Absolutely,
and whether we'll get to the goal line and figure it all out, I don't know, but it's the journey that matters.
And it feels like it is trying to find out what we really are.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So Hugh, from now on, when I say, what planet are you from, I can actually mean that.
And my answer will remain the same.
Which I want to know.
Which one?
Arcturus.
Okay.
Okay.
The red, blue, and white one.
Thanks, guys, for coming on the show. And for people watching tonight, of course, show up at the Science Center tomorrow at 9 a.m. and you can meet these guys and participate. And we're going to take a little break right now.
Very normal discussion.
Exactly. And we're going to come back in a couple of minutes with Michael Tellinger, and we're looking forward to that. We'll be right back.